welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of an absolutely wonderful book. I have been enjoying this read so much. It is so darkly funny and funnily dark. It is just so many great things that I am so excited to talk about. So welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Jen, thanks so much. Thanks for having me. I'm Luke Kennard. I'm a middle-aged writer from England. I live in Birmingham in the sort of Midlands of the country. My novel is called Black Bag, and it's based on a real-life psychology experiment that took place in the 60s, where a professor got somebody to dress head to foot in a black bag and sit in silence in his classes for a whole term, for a whole semester, to observe the students' reactions to the anonymous black bag figure, who wasn't allowed to speak, who wasn't allowed to interact in any way. And this was testing the mere exposure effect, so which states that if we're repeatedly encountering the same stimulus, even if we dislike it at first, we gradually come to feel a sort of affection for it. And this played out in the original experiment. And the write-up of the experiment is really sparse. We just get the sort of the setup and then the psychologist's conclusions from that the mere exposure effect is true. And like with a lot of these sort of strange and wonderful psychology case studies from the 60s, you don't find out much detail at all about what people actually said or did or who they were. And it sort of instantly struck me that the person who had to play Black Bag was quite an interesting factor in the experiment as well, and how they felt about being sort of reduced in a way to sort of complete silence and a kind of anonymity, but also really standing out because you look kind of absurd dressed in this sack. So that was it sort of starts from there, and it's from its first person perspective, and it's from the perspective of the out of work actor who takes on the role and then likes being Black Bag so much and feels like it's his sort of role of a lifetime that he just starts wearing it outside of the classroom setting as well, and just starts wearing it in his life and seeing what happens as a result of that. So it all kind of unfolds from there. So a real world experiment that I've kind of reset in the present day, and a new professor who's obsessed with it and keeps trying to redo it with different actors.
It's such a good reflection of what I imagine academia was like in the 60s, that you could do something like that and just be sort of like, let's do this regardless of well-being of all the participants and just like see what happens. So.
Yes, extremely lax ethical clearance in those days. And I think I've never really been interested in the more sensational ones, like the kind of Stanford prison experiment, which had such sort of dubious kind of conditions and, again, just a complete lack of consent or the welfare of the people involved. That actually the findings are almost nothing because it was such a strange, abusive thing to do in and of itself. And so obviously Black Bag is a slightly more benign thing. Less, it's still like a kind of like a prank show, a sort of online prank show, but done with sort of lofty academic aims, which whether they really sort of play out or not. But this kind of the absolute sort of lassitude to really do whatever you wanted if you were in that position of authority as a researcher is quite funny in itself. I think it's partly how the sort of academic in the novel gets gradually sort of pushed out of his job. I think is that he's trying to sort of still do these things as if they're in any way acceptable.
Wow. Yeah, much harder to get away with now, for sure. I enjoyed reading this book so much. But before we get into it too much, I'd love if you could just tell us a little bit about your writing career and perhaps your other works and sort of that came before this project.
For sure. Yeah. I suppose I've been doing this for about 20 years, I guess, as a published writer. I always wrote short stories from the age of about 8 onwards, I think, in lieu of forming many meaningful friendships with my peers. I sort of sat there making things up. And a rich inner life to substitute for a rich outer life. But then the first things that I got published were poems, and I guess I just started with poetry. So my first few books were kind of sort of indie press poetry, where I kind of loved the complete lack of any kind of commercial pressure with poetry and with independent publishing as well, and that you could sort of, you could experiment with voice and with form, and I took quite a lot of influence, I suppose, from absurdist writing and sort of strange little kind of parables and things like that don't necessarily go anywhere. So that was always sort of part of what I was interested in creating. And a lot of influence from American poets as well, like from sort of New York school, kind of John Ashbery and Bernadette Meyer and poets like that. Like I think I found a lot more sort of energy in that, in it being sort of my language, but a different culture, and one that sort of felt slightly more like it was actually trying to do something contemporary, that it wasn't held back by the great sort of tradition of poetry. It was deliberately trying to create a new tradition. And I liked that kind of radical sort of focus politically as well. So I think that was a big influence, as well as the kind of European surrealists and that sort of thing. And I carried on doing that for ages, partly because I just didn't know how to write a novel. I really desperately wanted to write a novel, but just couldn't conceive of working on that scale, or keeping the kind of parts of a plot moving in a way that would sustain for kind of 300 pages or more. And it took me kind of a long time. It was kind of 2007, I got shortlisted for the Forward Prize for Poetry, and that kind of gave me enough kind of exposure that I could like get an agent. And I went to meet a couple of agents, and the one that took me on is still my agent now, a wonderful, incredible editor and agent called Georgia Garrett. And one of the first things she said was like, how long do you think it will take you to write a novel? And I said, I think I can probably get you something within about 6 months, I think. And in the event, it took me almost 10 years, I think, to actually write a novel that was sort of, that actually hung together enough, had an interesting enough story, and that she could actually send out to publishers. So there was a long time, a lot of frustration, and a lot of just sort of a lot of kind of almost giving up as well, because it turns out that writing a novel is really hard, and I probably should have expected it to be. But so my first novel eventually came out in 2017, and it was called The Transition, and it was sort of about a self-improvement scheme that's supposed to, it was partly sort of autobiographical. It's partly just based on the fact that it was almost impossible to sort of afford to buy a house, and therefore to feel like you were a sort of permanent member of the society that you live in. You just always feel sort of temporary, going between sort of crummy rental properties, and never really feeling like you're established, never really feeling like you're part of a community, I think, as well. So the novel was set in the sort of near future, where instead of actually doing anything about how unaffordable just living an ordinary life is, the government introduces this scheme where you just sort of, you maximize your success. I mean, this is still the case now, right? The sort of grind set kind of stuff. It's like you should just be working like 18-hour days. It's just your fault. It's not systemic, even though it so clearly is, and affects people unequally as well. So it's a kind of satire of that kind of self-improvement culture, and the idea that you can somehow just dream and graft and earn your way out of the conditions that sort of more or less affect your entire generation, and are sort of inescapable. So that was like 2017. I think things have got like much, much worse since then. So it didn't do any good whatsoever then. And then and then I for ages worked on a second novel that was sort of much less high concept, and was just sort of about, it was kind of about emotional affairs, really. The second novel, it was sort of mostly in text messages between two people who are married to other people, and it was just a sort of deep dive into that strange text-based relationship that is also kind of instant. So it's as instant as talking, but it's entirely in the written word. And so it's like a sort of, I suppose it was like I was trying to do like my take on an epistolary novel, but one where you don't even have to wait for the return letter. It's just straight away. And the kind of danger of that, I guess, in that obviously it's a lack of fidelity in itself, emotionally or otherwise, but also that it's incredibly easy and more accessible than it ever was before, incredibly easy to get involved with, and also addictive in the same way like that a match 3 game is addictive in the way that the way people are getting addicted to talking to like AI now is addictive, but it's almost like a version of that, I think, because it's not real. This relationship only really exists in sort of witticisms and affections shared between two writers, essentially. So it's a sort of creative act in itself, but one that is deeply dangerous and actually doesn't bear much correspondence to what it's like being with that person in real life. So it was just a long, tortuous novel about that, I guess. And then this one, Black Bag, I started in about 2021, I think, so a while ago. So it has a lot of stuff that me of 5 years ago was really wound up about, that I'm still having to try to yeah, try to sort of recapture in some way. Try to still, there's still, I guess they still exist, those issues, but it's quite a lengthy writing process for this one. But it's kind of, yeah, it feels really nice for it to be kind of nearly out and kind of edited, I guess. But that's, yeah, that's kind of my story. At some point in that time of just going between like crummy day jobs, I managed to get a lectureship at University of Birmingham. So I sort of, the kind of campus environment is quite familiar to me and felt like a good place to set something. Lots of interesting characters and potential, I guess. I talk way too much. I'm sorry. Do stop me if I.
No, that was great. I love that. And it contextualized this novel so well. Right before we started recording, I was saying that, I am what some people like, I guess the glass half full thing to call it would be like an alt academic career, like glass
Yeah.
half empty is failed academic. So I really enjoyed being back on campus, even though it is sort of a dystopian nightmare because it's a familiar dystopian nightmare. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'd love to ask you about shaping the narrator. You walk a
Mm.
really fine line with him because he's deeply misanthropic, but there also is like he's funny enough that you're on his side for a lot of it. So talk about like shaping him and his voice, if you could.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, I had sort of conversations with my partner about this, and often she would be like, he actually needs to be kind of more, he needs to be more annoying and more pernickety and more kind of opinionated. And I think, yeah, I was always super aware of the potential for him to be just completely off-putting, like a kind of Holden Caulfield on steroids kind of voice in a way. But I think probably I took most from, and this was like a friend who just had like a complete library of Strindberg's journals and diaries. And I've sort of skimmed through a few of his plays, but like his diaries and journals are so, they're a little bit like Dostoevsky's Underground Man in Notes from Underground, the narrator of that, like incredibly embittered, essentially sort of frustrated and um feeling that you have something great to contribute artistically or otherwise that you've been denied the opportunity to practice or to give, and therefore you've become this sort of twisted version of yourself who blames, a lot of blame, a lot of sort of anger. And he's a failed actor, and he goes on quite a lot about how he loves plays, he loves actual plays, but these days the only thing he gets offered are sort of issues based interpretive kind of dance pieces and ensemble pieces that he just hates, and he just wants like a lovely play written by an actual playwright to be in. And of course, those do still exist, but they are maybe the opportunities to appear in stuff like that. Certainly in his experience is limited, and that he just gets he does like dinner theatre and murder mystery things, and then just does sort of work, pretentious art theatre work that he considers worthless. So he's sort of going through the motions of. So he's quite a sort of, but I completely, yeah, that I think that's it. He's just about self-aware enough and just about funny enough to stay on the right, to keep us on his side, whether we kind of agree with him or not. And I should, friends and acquaintances of mine make great experimental theatre and passionately committed political and issues-based theatre. So it's like, this is one of those things where I think Kingsley Amis once like insulted spaghetti in one of his novels, and then like later on it emerged that his favorite restaurant was an Italian restaurant. It was like, but I thought you hated Italian food. And he was like, no, it was just the character. It was just in that novel. So like, yeah, I think it took a lot, and I think it was like how annoying can I make him? And I think in earlier drafts probably he was a bit more tedious. Like he'd go off on, because he's quite a sort of maladaptive daydreamer and goes on these long sort of flights of fancy quite frequently. And that's always a bit of a balancing act. It's like, how much of that can I do before it just feels like I'm trolling the reader? And a lot of that just had to sort of be taken out. And I think sort of moments of vulnerability or charm of one kind or another, or sort of like admitting that he's like a bit of a dick sometimes as well, is sort of, that's kind of emerged. And then I suppose it's that thing. It's like you just sort of, you take a sort of side of yourself. You take you take sides of yourself that you're sort of most embarrassed by, in a way, sides of yourself that you wish you were less like, and then you just give it free rein. It's like you just let it all out, just exorcise it. Um, which I think can make for more engaging writing than trying to look good. And I feel this about poetry as well. I think like it should be almost a form of confession to us, sort of to the less good things about ourselves too. So it's sort of, yeah, he's like my sort of worst version of myself, I think, in a way, the narrator, at some level.
Kind of like what do they call it? Internal family systems or like parts work, like it's like let's love like let's learn to love this part of me that's like feels pretty hard to love.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Let's try and put it out there. Yeah, and it's present tense, and he goes on about how that is like it's the silliest tense, but also like the most honest tense, and it's the
Yeah.
sort of closest we come to talking to God because it's we can't hide anything. We just give our immediate reactions as they unfold, and that's a sort of slightly disingenuous tactic, but that's sort of I wanted it to be this kind of unfiltered sensibility, I guess, and not in a way of saying anything controversial, just in a way of just being quite petty and sort of full of sort of a kind of arrogance in a way. This sort of deep-seated feeling of superiority in a sense that I think he has, that I think all of us have in different ways. It's like, but again, so I think it's that thing like satire works when it not so much avoids punching down, but just flails everywhere.
Yes.
So it just implicates all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels very accurate to, not just general human foibles, but to, I think, like a thing that like kind of has to propel a lot of artists where you have to be some level
Yes.
of delusional, right? To think that you can
Oh
do
gosh,
this like
yes.
virtually impossible thing that only like a few people get to do. And
Yeah,
that helps you succeed as an artist, but like is hard for almost every other part of your life. So
that's so true. That is so true. Yes, and it's that kind of tenacity, right? That you're going to keep doing this anyway.
yeah.
It's just your level of self-esteem and bitterness is going to fluctuate
Yeah.
and sometimes become quite hard to be around, I think. And it's kind of all of the kind of hurt sort of feelings I think that sort of go with that, and that absolute self-assurance to keep doing it at all, knowing that there are going to be times where maybe something goes quite well, or a book is quite successful, or people are interested in it, and there are going to be times where you feel like you're being completely ignored. And the sensible part of you is like, well, obviously, like hundreds of books every year come out that deserve some attention and get completely ignored. Why would I expect it to be any different for me? How many like debut novels do I read a year? Not enough. How supportive actually am I of the scene that I'm in? And usually not enough is the answer to that, to expect any kind of things to go well for you. But you have to maintain this kind of self-belief that it is a necessity, or you just stop. You have to, and I think that's similar. I think that's one of the similarities with acting. That's why it felt quite natural to make him an actor, because I think it's just as frustrating. It's just at a quicker pace. The pace of rejection is faster.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I guess you don't get rejected to your face as much as a writer as actors
Yeah,
do. So
this is
yeah.
true. Yes.
It's usually at least by email. So
Yes, yeah.
I'd love to ask about, so in particular, I have time for one more question, I think. I love Claudio. He's also really
Good.
funny, even though like, he also is designed to be like a little bit, hateable too, because he's so successful at like a stupid job that shouldn't exist. And like,
Yes.
and I'd love to talk about how he sort of relates to your points about, our drive as a society now, a world society, to monetize like every aspect of our existence.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. So Claudio is basically the equivalent of a Twitch streamer, and a successful one, who more or less just plays video games and talks nonsense, but is good at it. And it's actually a very rare talent. It's actually really, there are, for every streamer with millions of followers, there are many, many, many with about 68 followers, and that's never going to change because they're just not actually that good at it. It's like but yeah. So I wanted him to be a sort of parody of that, and the fact that, and this goes back to sort of your confidence in your own art, I suppose, as well, in that you will be accepted just generally if you are successful, essentially financially successful. If it's making money, nobody questions the value of it. Whereas what Claudio is doing is, and he'd probably be the first to admit it, completely worthless. So I wanted them to be these kind of, they're the closest friends, the narrator and Claudio is they're childhood friends, and they've stayed in touch in their 30s. And Claudio is sort of everything that he isn't. He's complete, but it has sort of made this sort of cynical move into what turns out to be an actual viable way of making an income, even though it has no cultural value or very little cultural value, sporadic and accidental cultural value. But no disrespect to streamers, I find them very entertaining a lot of the time. So I think I wanted him to not be critically for me. I didn't want him to be like some sort of awful kind of manosphere kind of figure, although he is very blokey and he is kind of, but I wanted him to be sort of better than that, at least. That felt like such an easy target in a way, because they're so sort of, I mean, I see them as beneath contempt, but then they have like 5.9 million views to their
Yeah.
horrible Evo Psych, dreadful, disgusting, despicable nonsense that we mostly sort of disproved or got over, I think, over 50 years ago. It's so deeply dispiriting to see these kinds of things coming back, to even have to lower our own dignities as just the majority normal rational people, to even have to entertain these views which are so horrible, right? So it's like, and I just don't want to touch that. Like, so in like an early draft, like the professor in the book was a sort of almost like a sort of Jordan Peterson figure, and there are some elements of his like lecturing style that are still similar to that. But I think gradually I was just like, I just feel like it's important just to have any alternative representations of masculinity, still problematic and still full of weird oversensitivities and unprocessed kinds of gender issues, but not as extreme, because it's like I think other people are doing quite a good job of pointing out how awful that is. And also it's just beyond debate. They're so wrong. They've just sort of disappeared into some kind of, you can't reach them. You can't talk to people like that. You can't actually, because they're so disingenuous. They're just grifters, and they don't really live their lives particularly by the things that they're saying and by the things they're influencing vulnerable young men to do. And I was like, so I think there came a point where I always had to make that decision. And it's like, I can't save these people. There are people doing a better job. I've got my own students. I've got male students who I can try and talk to and pay attention to when they seem to be slipping into that kind of whole incel sort of world. Like, I can make a difference to that just in my everyday life. And in what I'm creating and what I write, like, obviously that has to exist. It has to be there because it is sadly part of the world, and less shamefully than it used to be for some reason. But I don't want that to be what I'm satirizing, because there are more interesting things to satirize, and there are subtler things about masculinity that are deeply problematic that I can write about, and it'll be more interesting than me just saying, oh, hey, by the way, guys, Andrew Tate's really bad, really bad. I'm not like that. I really disapprove of that. It's like, well, if you even need to say that, so I think an attempt at finding some kind of nuance, and Claudio sort of represents that. He's an opportunistic, blokey kind of grifter, but he's sort of all right. He's got a good heart, and he's not full of disgusting opinions most of the time. And he's sort of aware of the problems with masculinity, with his own identity as well. He does have some capacity to question that, and he sees, because he tries to monetize Black Bag as this sort of total theatre project, and he sees it as some almost sort of therapeutic way of men trying to erase themselves temporarily so that they can sort of reset, which is kind of bonkers, but that's sort of what he sees as a thing he can maybe do.
Yeah. It's like also very, like delusional, but like very hopeful in a way, I think. And
Yeah. Hope more than yes.
And making him a pretty benign streamer too. That is a very interesting point, I think, because I would like, it's interesting because there are some streamers that I enjoy too, and I don't think the value is really like entertainment or that sort of engagement, but it's really like almost like a social or like a third space type thing. It's like the equivalent of like hanging out in a basement with somebody and watching your friend play video games, that like adult life doesn't really allow for, so like let's get on YouTube and just watch a guy play Resident Evil or whatever it is.
No, that's so true. It taps into that. And it's no, I used to like my sister had a PlayStation that was like the first really good console in my household when I was growing up. And I would hang out in her room endlessly watching her play the first Tony Hawk's game, and what else was it? Final Fantasy VII. And that was I think it taps back into that for me as well. There's a sort of almost sort of comforting feeling, the same way that like my addiction to podcasts goes back to just listening to a lot of cassette audiobooks as a kid as well. It's like there's something I think sort of meaningfully comforting about it. It's not just sort of pure escapism, but it does sort of, you're right. It's very sort of third spacey. It's not trying to produce a work of art. It is something social. And I think that does have a value. The people who are good at it, I think it is quite a hard job. I mean, I think it's sort of, it's the ones who are really successful obviously make a kind of ludicrous amount of money from it. That's maybe slightly. But I think this is the same with same with novels really. Like a novel is a kind of non-fungible token in a way. It's not sold at cost price, and it's like, and I suppose ideally for me, like a good art scene would be like a lot of people practicing their art and making a living wage, rather than 30 people making millions and millions of people making about £1,000 a year. It's a bit sort of all or nothing. And I just think a healthier scene would be like the kind of indie music scene in like the 90s, 2000s, when there was still physical media. Like people could make like $40,000-$50,000 a year, like great American indie musicians. Like that was, and nobody became like a massive celebrity, but you could survive on that, and people valued what you were doing. You maybe had like 100,000 fans instead of millions, but it was like that was healthy. That was good. That was good for culture. It was good for art. It was good for people making art as well as audiences, and the diversity of the stuff that was available. It's like things feel like they've narrowed down a lot in every art form recently, and I guess it's partly that's a sort of underlying note of the novel too. Like not just saying like, oh, isn't it sad, but just being like, it doesn't have to be like this, I guess.
Yeah, for all of its sort of clear-eyedness about like how dystopian sort of like the society that we find ourselves in can be, there is like sort of a hopefulness to it too, because I think in order to be so disappointed and embittered, like you have to believe that things can be better at least, because otherwise you're just like resigned, you're not like angry. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I really like that. There was the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, wrote a book on The Simpsons, which he described as the most important propaganda for decency of the 20th century, which it was a beautiful book. It was really good. It was just an amazing sort of long-bearded English sort of monk-like figure, but he was like the biggest fan of The Simpsons. But I think like really good satire is a kind of, I'm not saying that I've written really good satire, but in general, good satire is a sort of propaganda for decency. It's always a sort of tacit lamentation for that which is not happening. So the sort of presentation of whatever. The Simpsons is quite unilateral, of the media, of education, of everything. It's like, we could so clearly be doing something better than this. This is such a sort of broken system that we're insisting on as if it's a part of the natural order, whereas even actually the natural order is a distortion in itself. There isn't any such thing. But yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That is so interesting. And yeah, it's been delightful talking to you about this book, and I am so excited to recommend it to our patrons. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been really wonderful.
Jen, thanks so much. And just a great privilege to do anything to do with public libraries, which are so deeply important to me and to everything that I know. So thank you for your work and for inviting me on.
Thank you. All right, listeners, you have your homework. Please check out Black Bag. It'll be available as of the time that you hear this, so please head to your favorite bookstore, or library, website, wherever you like to go for books. All right, thank you for joining us. It is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.